You paid your rent this month. Your lights are still on. Your car started this morning. By every traditional measure, you're fine. You're not homeless. You're not bankrupt. You haven't lost everything. But something has fundamentally changed. You're making the same salary you made 2 years ago, maybe even a bit more, and yet you can't afford the same life. You're working, you're budgeting, you're doing everything right, and the gap between your income and your expenses grows wider every month. The official economic data says inflation is cooling. The stock market says everything is fine, but your bank account tells a very different story. This isn't about poor financial decisions. This is about structural economic pressure that has quietly converged on ordinary households, creating a form of everyday collapse that won't show up in headlines until it's far too late. If you want to understand what's actually happening to the American economy before the official narrative catches up, subscribe now, because these early signals matter more than the headlines. Let me show you what's really happening. When economists say inflation has moderated or cooled, they're technically correct. The Consumer Price Index shows that the rate of price increases has slowed. But that's not the same as prices going down. It's not even the same as prices stabilizing at a tolerable level. Here's what actually happened. From 2020 to 2023, cumulative inflation pushed the cost of essential goods and services up by 20 to 30% or more in many categories. Then, when the rate of increase slowed in 2024, officials celebrated. But households don't experience the rate of change. They experience the total accumulated cost. If your grocery bill went from $600 a month to $800 a month, and then inflation cooled, your bill doesn't drop back to $600. It stays at $800. Maybe it inches up to $820 instead of $850. That's what moderation means in practice. Food costs remain elevated. Energy costs remain elevated. Insurance, auto, home, renters remains elevated. Childcare, if you need it, remains elevated. These aren't luxuries. These are the baseline costs of existence, and they have reset at a permanently higher level while incomes have not kept pace. This is why households feel poorer despite official reassurances. They are poorer. Their purchasing power has been structurally reduced, and no amount of good news about inflation rates changes the math they face every day. One of the least discussed but most revealing economic stress points is utilities, electricity, natural gas, water, and sewer services. Utilities occupy a strange economic space. They're essential. You cannot function without them. But unlike food, which you can substitute or reduce, utilities are largely fixed costs. You need heat in winter. You need water. You need power. And increasingly, utility companies are reporting something troubling: rising delinquencies, surging payment plan enrollments, and growing numbers of households facing disconnection. In states across the country, utility regulators have noted a measurable increase in customers falling behind on bills. Some utilities report that overdue balances have doubled or tripled compared to pre-pandemic norms. Payment assistance programs are overwhelmed. Disconnection moratoriums, where they existed, have largely ended, and the consequences are becoming visible. What's particularly significant is that utilities behave like debt rather than expenses. If you miss a payment, the balance doesn't disappear, it accumulates. Late fees stack. Eventually, service is threatened. And because you cannot live without power or water, households are forced into a kind of financial triage. Pay the utility bill first, even if it means skipping something else. This creates a cascading problem. Utilities eat into budgets that were already stretched by rent, groceries, and transportation. Something else has to give. Often, that something is debt payments, credit cards, medical bills, or other obligations that seem less immediate than keeping the lights on. Utilities are canaries in the coal mine. When households start struggling to pay for the most basic, non-negotiable services, it signals that discretionary income has vanished, and essential income is now under siege. Credit card debt in the United States has surpassed $1 trillion. Auto loan delinquencies are rising. Student loan payments, which resumed in late 2023 after a multi-year pause, have reintroduced a financial burden that many households had restructured their lives around avoiding. But here's the critical shift. Debt is no longer being used primarily for consumption or lifestyle enhancement. It's being used for survival. Households are putting groceries on credit cards. They're financing car repairs they can't afford up front. They're using credit to cover medical expenses, utility bills, and rent shortfalls. This is fundamentally different from the credit use of previous decades, when debt was often tied to discretionary purchases, vacations, electronics, home upgrades. The Federal Reserve's data on credit card delinquencies shows a steady uptick. Charge-offs, debts that lenders have given up trying to collect, are increasing. Auto loan delinquencies, particularly on subprime loans, are climbing back toward pre-pandemic levels and, in some segments, exceeding them. What this reveals is not irresponsibility. It reveals desperation. When people take on debt to buy food or keep their car running so they can get to work, they're not living beyond their means. They're trying to stay within the bounds of survival, and those bounds have narrowed. The danger here is compounding. Debt taken on to cover essentials carries interest. That interest becomes another essential expense. The cycle tightens. Savings, if they existed, would be drained. Emergency funds vanish. And once a household is in this position, any disruption, a medical issue, a job loss, a car breakdown, becomes catastrophic. Housing costs have become the single largest factor in household financial fragility. For renters, the situation is stark. Median rent has increased significantly over the past several years, while wages have not kept pace. The traditional guideline that housing should consume no more than 30% of income is now functionally obsolete for millions of Americans. Many households are spending 40, 50, or even 60% of their income on rent alone. This leaves almost nothing for everything else. After rent, food, transportation, and utilities, discretionary income evaporates. Savings become impossible. Any unexpected expense becomes a crisis. For homeowners, the pressure is different, but no less severe. Mortgage rates surged in 2022 and 2023, effectively locking many people into their current homes. Those who bought recently are locked into high monthly payments. Those who bought earlier can't afford to move because selling and buying again would mean taking on a far more expensive mortgage. But even for homeowners without a mortgage, costs have surged. Property taxes have increased as home values have risen. Homeowners insurance has spiked dramatically, particularly in states facing climate-related risks like wildfires and hurricanes. In some areas, insurance premiums have doubled or tripled, and in others, coverage has been dropped entirely. Maintenance and repairs, deferred during tight budget years, are now unavoidable and unaffordable. A roof replacement that might have cost $8,000 in 2019 now costs $14,000. An HVAC system, a water heater, a major plumbing issue, these aren't luxuries, they're necessities, and they're hitting households that have no margin left. The broader consequence is economic stagnation. When housing costs consume everything, people stop spending elsewhere. They stop buying furniture, upgrading appliances, hiring contractors, and investing in home improvements. This ripples through the economy, particularly in sectors that depend on residential spending. Housing has become a pressure multiplier. It doesn't just strain budgets, it eliminates flexibility. One of the most persistent findings in recent economic surveys is the sheer number of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, not just low-income households, but middle-income earners as well. Recent data suggests that somewhere between 60 and 70% of Americans have little to no savings buffer. They cannot cover a $1,000 emergency expense without borrowing or selling something. This isn't a matter of financial literacy. This is a matter of arithmetic. When your fixed costs, rent or mortgage, utilities, insurance, transportation, food, debt payments, consume 95 or 100% of your income, saving is not a choice. It's a mathematical impossibility. What's particularly concerning is that this fragility has crept upward into income brackets that traditionally represented stability. Households earning $75,000, $100,000, or even $125,000 a year report living paycheck to paycheck in high-cost areas. These are people with college degrees, stable jobs, and reasonable financial habits, and they have no cushion. This creates a brittle system. A single missed paycheck, a single unexpected bill, a single disruption, and the whole structure collapses. Financial triage becomes the norm, deciding which bill to pay late, which expense to defer, which service to cut. This is not resilience. This is precarity pretending to be stability. If you looked only at the stock market, you'd think the economy was thriving. Equity indexes have reached record highs. Corporate profits remain strong. Investor sentiment is bullish. But stock market performance and household financial health are not the same thing. In fact, they increasingly move in opposite directions. Corporations have maintained profitability in part by reducing labor costs through layoffs, automation, and the integration of AI-driven productivity tools. This boosts earnings per share and stock prices, but it also means fewer jobs, stagnant wages, and greater income insecurity for workers. Productivity gains, which used to translate into wage growth, now primarily translate into shareholder returns. The disconnect is structural. When a company announces layoffs and its stock price rises, that tells you everything you need to know about whose interests the system prioritizes. Meanwhile, the majority of Americans own little to no stock. Retirement accounts, where they exist, are often modest. The wealth generated by market gains accrues overwhelmingly to the top 10% of earners, and disproportionately to the top 1%. So when officials point to market strength as evidence of economic health, they're describing a reality that most households do not inhabit. For the majority of Americans, the economy is not the stock market. It's the price of eggs, the cost of rent, the balance on their credit card, and whether they can afford to fix their car. Market health and household health have decoupled. One is thriving, the other is under siege. There's a category of economic activity that doesn't make headlines, but reveals stress early. Local services, home inspections, pest control, HVAC maintenance, landscaping, small repairs, routine trade work. These are services that people delay when money is tight, and the professionals who provide them are often the first to notice when demand drops. Across the country, small business owners in these sectors are reporting the same thing: fewer calls, more price resistance, and longer payment delays. Homeowners are deferring maintenance. Renters are skipping non-emergency repairs. Customers who used to schedule annual service are now going 2 or 3 years between calls. This is significant because these services represent the circulation of money within local economies. When households stop hiring plumbers, electricians, painters, and handymen, those workers have less income. They, in turn, spend less at local businesses. The contraction spreads. It's not dramatic, it's not sudden, but it's measurable. And it's a leading indicator of deeper stress. When people stop maintaining their homes, stop fixing things before they break, stop investing in their immediate surroundings, it signals that discretionary income has evaporated and essential income is now too precious to risk. Here's what makes this different from past recessions or downturns. It's not one shock. It's the simultaneous escalation of multiple pressures, each reinforcing the others. Rent goes up. That reduces the money available for utilities. Utilities go unpaid, creating late fees and disconnection risk. To avoid disconnection, a household uses a credit card. The credit card balance grows. Interest accrues. Minimum payments increase. Now there's less money for food. Food gets put on credit. The debt grows further. Meanwhile, the car needs a repair. There's no savings left. The repair goes on credit or gets deferred. If deferred, the car breaks down. If it breaks down, getting to work becomes a crisis. Missing work means lost income. Lost income means missed rent. This is the convergence effect. Each pressure point is connected. When one fails, the others destabilize. And because households have no buffer, no margin, no slack in the system, the cascading failures happen quickly. This is why every day's collapse is different from a dramatic crash. It's not a single catastrophic event. It's a slow-motion unraveling, where each week brings a new, impossible choice, and each choice narrows the next set of options. Behind every data point is a person. Retirees on fixed incomes, Social Security, modest pensions, are watching their purchasing power erode in real time. A benefit that felt adequate 3 years ago now barely covers rent and groceries. There's no overtime to work, no promotion to chase, no flexibility, just the slow realization that the rest of their life will be spent managing scarcity. Working families are caught in a different trap. Both parents work. Childcare costs consume one entire paycheck. They defer medical care, skip dental checkups, ignore the check engine light, and hope nothing breaks. They're employed, insured, doing everything society says they're supposed to do, and they're falling behind. Younger adults, meanwhile, have stopped believing that stability is achievable. Homeownership feels impossible. Starting a family feels financially irresponsible. Retirement savings seem like a fantasy. They're not pessimistic, they're realistic. They're looking at the math and drawing the only logical conclusion. These aren't failures of character. These are rational responses to structural economic conditions that have made ordinary life unaffordable. In response to these pressures, people are adapting. They're cutting subscriptions, growing vegetables, learning to fix things themselves, shopping secondhand, carpooling, reducing energy use, simplifying their lives in ways that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. There's a quiet resilience in this. People are resourceful. They find ways to survive. But there's a limit to what individual adaptation can accomplish. You can cut costs only so far before you hit the floor of basic survival. You can defer maintenance only so long before things break beyond repair. You can stretch a budget only so thin before the math simply doesn't work anymore. Personal responsibility and individual resilience are important, but they cannot substitute for structural economic stability. When the cost of essentials rises faster than wages, when debt becomes a survival tool, when utilities behave like financial obligations rather than services, no amount of budgeting or discipline can bridge that gap indefinitely. Resilience is admirable, but it shouldn't be required just to live an ordinary life. The collapse of everyday life doesn't announce itself. There are no headlines, no stock market crashes, no dramatic turning points. It happens quietly, in living rooms and kitchen tables, in overdue notices and deferred repairs, in the growing gap between income and survival. It's happening now, not in the future, not as a warning, now. By the time this stress becomes visible in official economic data, millions of households will have already been hollowed out. The savings will be gone. The debt will be insurmountable. The margin for error will have vanished. The signals are here. The question is whether we're willing to see them. What does it mean when ordinary life, working, paying bills, raising a family, requires luck just to avoid catastrophe? If you want to keep tracking these shifts as they unfold, subscribe. The early signals always matter more than the headlines that come later.